Hi everyone, my name is Brian Loxton. I work for the Ohio Department of Transportation in the Office of Geotechnical Engineering. Today I want to show you how to use the ODOT Standard Fence Reports in gINT to export boring graphics out of gINT, how to use the gINT conversion VBA in MicroStation to convert those graphics to meet the ODOT CADD standards, and how to use the Move to Models tool to set those graphics up to be used with the Place Boring Graphics VBA to place the boring graphics on your geotechnical exploration sheets. So let's get started. So I have my gINT project database file open. I just finished using the geotechnical report VBA in MicroStation in GeoPack to export my boring location information from my GPK file. I have all of that data populated on my borehole tab now. The geotechnical VBAs in MicroStation and GeoPack and the fence reports, they're all built around the ODOT workflow. So you have to have the data entered into gINT the same way that ODOT does, or you're not going to be able to use those tools. The gINT fence reports also require you to have northing and easting values populated on your borehole tab, or you're not going to be able to use those to export any data. So let's go look at those fence reports now. On the Report Design tab, then Fences. There are two new fence reports, the Standard ODOT Fence Report and the Standard ODOT Fence Report with descriptions. The stratigraphy and groundwater A and B size, those were provided by gINT and we're not currently using those. I'm going to pick the Standard ODOT Fence Report. The first thing you have to do is move left of the pull-down list, pick the icon for Properties. The fence reports, just like the boring logs and most of the reports in gINT, are built around a sheet of paper. Both of the fence reports are built around an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. gINT gets this pick list from your default printer, so you have to go and find the 11 by 17 page. It may be called Ledger, it may be called Tabloid, or it might just be 11 by 17. Find it on the pick list and select it. You only have to do this one time because gINT will remember it after that. You don't have to do it again unless you change your default printer. After you tell it OK, you may get another pop-up dialog box that says something about the frame is outside the printable boundaries. Cancel that. Check and make sure that your left margin and bottom margin are set to 1/4 of an inch, and then it should be OK. Let's look at the report now. The frames around the outside are the edges of the 11 by 17 sheet of paper, and the printer margin that gINT read from your default printer. We don't have to worry about any of that. What we care about is this interior rectangle. Everything above the line is the header block on the boring graphic, the boring ID and the boring location information. Everything below this line is the footer block, the labels for the N60 column and the moisture content column, and the boring location information that's going to be used by the Place Boring Graphics VBA. We'll talk about that some more in a little bit. So let's look a little closer. So again, everything above the top line is the header information, the boring ID number, the boring location information, and if your first sample is pavement or sod or topsoil, it'll report that. This is the line work that will become the frame for the boring graphic. On the left side is the N60 and the refusal blow count data. On the right side is the moisture content, the top of rock indicator, the cells for wet plastic and wet non-plastic samples, and the water level indicators. I could have combined some of these and had fewer elements here, but I didn't want to do that. I'm a big fan of modular construction. Easier to build, easier to test, easier for you to modify these elements to match how you want to put the data in gINT. And we'll go look at the bottom. Again, below the bottom line is just the footer information. A label for the N60 column, a label for the moisture contents, and the boring location information. This text element contains the boring location information that the VBAs are going to use to place the boring graphics on the profiles and the cross sections. That's very important. We'll talk about that some more after a bit. Let's go look at the other report. We'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. The difference between the two reports is that the report with descriptions will export any data that you have in the supplemental descriptions data field, the non-component descriptions data field, and of course the rocker core descriptions if you have any. Let's go take a look at those. On the Input tab, on the Material Descriptions tab, under Lithology, the non-component descriptions data field, and on the Soil Components tab, the supplemental descriptions data field. Those data fields contain the notes that we would use to describe uncontrolled fill, or organic soils, or if cobbles and boulders had been encountered during the drilling. Anything that you would want to note on the side of the boring graphics, those are the data fields we would use to record that information. And of course, the rocker core descriptions if you have any. So we'll go back. So the last thing we need to look at is the layers. We added layers to gINT in the fence reports. Each of the various elements of the fence reports has been assigned to a layer in gINT. And we gave the layers in gINT the same names as the levels in MicroStation, so that after we export a DXF out of gINT and merge that into MicroStation, the elements will be on the same level as what the layer name is in gINT. That's the extent of the control that we have over the attributes. The gINT colors will not translate to a MicroStation color, and the gINT line types will not translate to a MicroStation line style. That's why we need a VBA to convert the graphics. So let's go export some boring graphics out of gINT now. On the Output tab, in the Fences tab, I'm going to go back, I'm going to toggle this back over to the ODOT Standard Fence Report. My data source block is the same as on the boring logs. You've all seen that. My source file is my current gINT database file. Under Exploration ID, you have the option to select which borings you want to export boring graphics for, one of them or all of them, or some combination. If you want all of them, just leave it blank. Under Fence Options, the vertical axis minimum, set that to 0. You don't always have to do that. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And rather than me go through the conditions of when you have to and when you don't, if you just set that to 0, nothing bad will happen. The vertical axis scale must be set to the vertical scale of your profile and your cross-section sheets, either 5 or 10 or 20, whatever you've used, even though we told you to always use 10 in the SGE. If your profile is 5:1 vertical scale and your cross sections are 10:1 vertical scale, then you must have two sets of boring graphics, one at 5 scale and one at 10 scale, or whatever the different scales are that you've used in your sheets. I'm going to use 10 scale today just for demonstration purposes. You must pick equally spaced points along the axis. That's going to put all your boring graphics in a straight line, equally spaced one from the other. The point spacing is that spacing. The minimum value that you can use here is 5. That's not a gINT requirement. That's a requirement of the Graphics Conversion VBA. And if you use the fence report with the descriptions, I strongly suggest you use an even larger value than that, maybe a 10. And I recommend that you pick order by exploration ID. So let's take a look at those. We'll do a preview. So there it's generated my boring graphics. It's the N60s and the moisture contents, the headers and the photo blocks. You'll notice it doesn't have any patterns on it, but it has the names of the cells, the lithology layers to use to pattern those areas with. And we'll go back. Let's export those. Chase down my presentation folder that I'm working in. I'm going to save that in my base maps. You must save this as a DXF file in order to get it to work. So I'm going to save it by PID number for my project. Append the scale to that so I know what scale it is. Again, if you have to have two different sets of boring graphics, you would want two different files. We don't have any standards set up for the name for this file. I would encourage you to adopt some office standards so at least in your office they're all consistent. Tell it save, and then you still have to tell it export. So you saw the export dialog box pop up and close when it finished exporting. So let's go look at those boring graphics now. So I have my cover sheet file open. I'm going to work in the design model of my cover sheet. We don't have any standards set up for this, so you can work in any blank design model that you want to. I would discourage you from creating a new blank DGN file to do this work in. You should minimize the number of DGN files that you have for any one project. And if you have a project that has multiple alignments on it, then you're going to need to divide your boring graphics up into separate files, one for each alignment. That's to facilitate use of the Place Boring Graphics tool. You can go and watch the other video on how to use the Place Boring Graphics VBA. So I'm going to do a reference file attachment. Tools, attach. Pick my DXF file. Tell it open. You're going to get this pop-up box about the units. Make sure this is set on survey feet or your boring graphics will be the wrong scale. Tell it OK. My default settings are correct. On my reference file attachment box, I'll tell that OK. Behind my transparent toolbox, you can see my boring graphics in the background. Tell it to merge into master from this point. Give it a data point. Tell it OK. I'm going to collapse this box. Fit my view window. So now I have the boring graphics from my DXF file copied into my DGN file. If you had wanted to do a file import and import a CAD file to import that DXF file, you would have first had to have opened the DXF file in MicroStation. Then you would have got that units pop-up box. You could have set your units to survey feet there and then exited the DXF file and then came back in here and did a file import that would have got your boring graphics to be the correct scale. So I have my boring graphics in my DGN file now. Let's go look at the levels. What you'll see is the various elements, the various items of the boring graphics are on separate levels based on the name of the layer that they were assigned to in the gINT fence report. And the graphics conversion VBA is going to read all of those levels and convert those elements to meet the ODOT CADD standards. So let's go look at that now. At the top, under the ODOT pull-down menu, under Geotech, gINT conversion tool, you'll get this pop-up box. The question mark is the help key. If you push that, that's going to launch a PDF file that has some background information and some instructions for it. The VBA was originally written by Eric Thomas of Eric Thomas Consulting under contract to ODOT's Office of CAD and Mapping Services. It was subsequently modified by John Dursick, also of ODOT's Office of CAD and Mapping Services. So on the dialog box for boring type, if you hit the pull down, you'll see there was project and instrumented and historic. We actually have separate CAD standards for plain project borings and instrumented borings on your current project. And then we went ahead and set up the VBA to do historic borings, realizing that one day the borings that you have in gINT now will be historic borings to be added to some project down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a project. If you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, the VBA will actually give you prompts as to what you need to do next. So it says select the boring graphics. I'm going to select just these first two and go ahead and convert those to be project borings. So then you just push the button. You're going to see the pattern dialog box pop up and close as it's patterning the boring graphics. Then you get this other box that just says process complete. Tell it OK. I'm going to go ahead and toggle this over onto instrumented and pick my other two borings. And go ahead and convert those to be instrumented borings. And again, you saw the pattern dialog box and you get this box that says process complete. Tell it OK. So right before it converts any graphics, the VBA places a mark in the design file so that if I decided that I didn't want those two borings to be instrumented, I could just tell it undo to the mark and it would undo those and go back to how the graphics were originally. And then you could just reset the boring type to project and select them again and reconvert those graphics. But I'm going to leave those as instrumented borings. I'm going to go ahead and close this box for now. So let's go look at the levels again now. We have some elements still on the scratch levels, common to both types of borings. I'll come back and talk about those again in a minute. The instrumented borings, the elements are all on the instrumented levels. And then the project borings, the graphics are all on the project levels. The text will be on one of the three text levels. Right now, the VBA is set up to only use the slanted font, font number 31. If you want to use the straight font, you have to select all that text and change the font by hand. The layers are on the layers level, and the rest of the boring frame is on the boring level, and the center line is a weight 2 and a dashed line style number 5. Let me shut these off again. And we'll zoom in on this boring. You are responsible for cleaning up the overdrafting. Any place where the N60 values overlap each other, or the moisture contents overlap each other, you have to clean those up by hand. If you need to edit a piece of text, make sure that the annotation scale is off, otherwise the text will be the wrong scale once you have a reference file attached to your sheets. If you edit the text in the header block, it will shift off center ever so slightly. You may want to realign that. I have seen the fence report shift the N60s and the moisture contents down in the top 2 feet of the boring, so you'll want to check for that and correct those if you need to. If you use the simple fence report and you have samples that need notes beside them, then you're still responsible for adding those notes for uncontrolled fill, organic soils, cobbles and boulders encountered. Anything that you would want noted on the side of the boring graphic, you're responsible for adding that. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the rest of my overdrafting right now, and then I'm going to come back. I have my overdrafting all cleaned up now. I'm going to zoom in and look at boring number 2 again. In the header block on the second line, you're going to notice a couple of pieces of text laid over top of each other. On GT project text level 2, you're going to find the offset. On GT project text level 3, you're going to find the station. That was done so that after we use the Move to Models tool and after we use the Place Boring Graphics tool and we have this boring graphic attached to a profile and a cross section, all you have to do is toggle these 2 levels, one of them on and one of them off, for on the profile and the cross section. On the profile, you would want project text level 2 on, that would display the offset, and then on the cross section, you would want text level 2 off and text level 3 on to show the station. You also notice on scratch level 3, we still have both the station and the offset. That's in the event that you have a culvert job, or if you need to offset this boring on your profile for clarity to clean up any type of overdrafting conflict that you might have. You would just take this piece of text on this scratch level, change its attributes to be on one of the project text levels. You also notice that the stations and the offsets in the header block, they've all been formatted to the whole foot. That was done by the gINT fence report. Let me go back over into gINT a moment. And the Input tab. We told you in the SGE, anytime you report a boring location, to round off the station and the offset to the nearest whole foot, and to report the elevation to the nearest tenth of a foot. You do not have to format that data when you put it into the table. The boring logs, the fence reports, and the summary of soils test data table, those reports are all configured to format the data accordingly. If you use the Geotechnical Report VBA in MicroStation and GeoPack, it's going to calculate the station and the offset to 3 decimal places and it's going to report the elevation to 2 decimal places. You are required by the ODOT surveying and mapping specifications to survey your boring locations northing and easting to 3 decimal places and elevation to 2 decimal places. If you use the G-Technical Report VBA, it's going to report northing and easting to 3 decimal places. So all you have to do is paste those values into this set of data fields. You can then use the tools in gINT to automatically convert those northing and easting values to a set of latitude and longitude values. Then you can just copy this set of latitude and longitude data into these 2 data fields for latitude and longitude. We told you in the SGE to report the latitude and longitude to 6 decimal places. We then formatted the boring logs and the summary of soils test data table to round off the values in these 2 data fields to 6 decimal places. So you don't have to format this data in this table. You can just copy and paste it and leave it alone. Let's go back over into MicroStation now. I want to look at the rest of the data on the scratch levels now. Scratch level 1 has the names of the soil and rock types that the VBA used to pattern the boring graphic with. We left them on there just for a visual check. They're on scratch level 1. They shouldn't plot, and you can just delete them if you want to, or you can leave them on there. Scratch level 2 has the boring location information on it at the bottom of the boring graphic. This is the boring location information that the Move to Models tool and the Place Boring Graphics VBA are going to use to place the boring on the profiles and the cross sections. It's the station, the offset and the offset direction, the top of the boring elevation, the bottom of the boring elevation, and the depth of the boring. The Place Boring Graphics tool does not use the bottom elevation or the depth of the boring. Those are left over from when we were placing boring graphics on sheets by hand. It's on there for a visual check. I left it on there. I didn't bother taking it off. You'll notice that the boring location information is not formatted. It is presented here just as precisely as it was entered into the gINT table. You can edit this data if you need to, but do not move it around. The station must be the top line, the offset and the offset direction must be the second line, and the elevation of the boring must be the third line. Let me stop and back up a minute now. I'm sure a couple of you have noticed that I only have 4 boring graphics, but I have 5 borings. There was a bug in gINT where sometimes the fence reports will not export the boring graphics for that last boring. Let me go back over into MicroStation and we'll go look at my geotechnical base map. So I have a landslide job and I have my borings laid out the way we told you to do it in the SGE, where I have borings parallel and perpendicular to the center line of my roadway in line with the direction of my landslide. On export, the gINT fence report tries to draw a best fit straight line between the centers of all the borings, and it can't do that, so it blows up and doesn't export the graphics for that last boring. I have that bug reported to Bentley. I don't know when or if they're ever going to fix it. All you have to do is go back over into gINT and export the boring graphics for that one boring by itself. So we'll go to the Output tab and the Fences tab. I'm going to go ahead and pick the fence report with descriptions this time, just so we can look at the output from that report. I'm going to tell it boring B3, 0 and 10 scale. We don't have to do any of this now because we only have the one boring. Pick DXF, give it a name. I'm going to tell it B3 and still append it with 10 scale. Tell it save and export. We'll go back over into MicroStation and go look at that now. References, tools, attach, pick my new boring, tell it open, tell it OK, tell it OK again. I'm going to collapse this box for just a moment. You can see that my boring graphics for boring number 3, they came in over top of the graphics for my existing borings. So we'll go and move that out of the way. That's why I did not immediately merge that into my current design model. If you ever need to do this, to add additional borings to your design model at this stage, maybe you have borings in 2 different GINT files, maybe you have 2 different phases of drilling, those borings must all be aligned in a straight line by the top of the boring graphic elevation. That's a requirement of the Move to Models tool that I'm going to show you in a moment. And now we'll do a merge. And I'm going to fit my view. Actually, let's zoom in and take a look at that. And the levels. You'll see the rock core descriptions. They're on scratch level 10. The rest of my descriptions are on scratch level 7 and scratch level 8. So what I want to do right now is just clean this up a little bit before I convert to the graphics. So I don't need that note there. I'm going to delete that one. I want to keep part of this one note. So I'm going to edit that, shut my annotation scale off. I want to keep this moderately organic part of that note. And then I don't need any of the rest of those. We'll delete those. I want to edit this one description as well. And then we'll look at the rock core descriptions again. So you can see my limestone description overlaps with my interbedded sandstone and siltstone. So I'm just going to move that. There are provisions in GINT to wrap this text. I did not set any of that up. I let it go ahead and kick those out as long lines of text. Also, I cannot get GINT to make a text node where a multi-line description would be one element in MicroStation. As it is now, each individual line of text is its own element.
I think this is going to be problematic. I envision you reference file attaching this to your profiles and your cross sections, and then having some kind of drafting conflict where you have to come back and label these A, B, and C, and then move your descriptions to someplace else on your sheet for clarity. And I'm concerned that these individual lines of text will get lost or mixed up, but at least it's all there, and you don't have to retype your descriptions by hand or try and copy and paste them off the PDFs or your boring logs.
So I'm going to convert those graphics now. Under the ODOT pull-down menu, under Geotechnical, GINT conversion tool, I'm going to select these boring graphics. I'm going to leave it on project and tell it convert. And then tell it OK. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse my toolbox again. I want to zoom in here one more time. We'll look at the levels again. After conversion, the rock core descriptions are going to be on the text level with the rest of the text for the boring graphic. I'm going to talk about the Move to Models tool now. It's on my tool palette with my GINT conversion tool. The Move to Models tool takes the boring graphics for each individual boring and moves them to their own model in your current design file. That's going to set you up to use the Place Boring Graphics tool to automate the placement of your boring graphics on your profiles and your cross sections. The Move to Models tool searches your current design model for all the boring center lines. That's why the borings have to all be in a straight line. It then draws an imaginary box around the boring center lines 2.5 feet above and 2.5 feet on each side and 2.5 feet below that boring center line. Anything inside this box or that overlaps the box is going to get moved to the new model. That's why when you export your boring graphics out of GINT, the minimum spacing must be 5. The VBA also finds the top piece of text in the header block, and it uses that piece of text for the name of the new model that it moves all the boring graphics to. So don't mess this up. Make sure that your boring ID number remains the very top piece of text in your header block. Let me delete this. And I'm going to go ahead and run that now. So it took a moment for that to run, so I paused the video and I came back now. You're going to get the process complete box. Just go ahead and tell it OK. I'm going to collapse my toolbox because I don't need it anymore. The process ends with the Models dialog box open, and you can see, in addition to the original design and sheet models, we now have one model for each of our boring graphics. If you look in your view groups, you're going to see temporary views for those models, for the borings. Those are only good for the current MicroStation session. If you exit MicroStation and come back, these are going to be gone, and you'll have to toggle between your boring graphics using the Models dialog box. We're back in the design model, but the design model is empty now. It moved all of the boring graphics to the new models. It did not copy. It did not leave the originals in the design model. And once again, the VBA placed a mark in the file so that if you wanted to go back and put all the boring graphics back in the design model, you could just do an undo to the mark now at this stage. So let's go look at one of the borings now. Let me close my dialog box. When the VBA moved the boring graphics to its own model, it placed the top center of the boring graphic at the origin of that new model. That was done to facilitate reference file attaching the boring graphic to profiles and cross sections by the Place Boring Graphics VBA. So don't be moving these boring graphics around inside of these new models. The VBA also created a text tag associated with the boring ID number. It reads the boring location information from the bottom of the boring graphic and populates that information into this tag. It's the boring ID number and then a blank field. When we were developing these tools, we debated if we needed or wanted the Geopack chain name, and this blank field was set up to hold the chain name, and then we decided that we were not going to use it. Then it's the station and the offset and the elevation. We left that tag visible and unlocked so that you can edit that tag if you need to. For instance, if you had an intersection job or a project where you would have one boring that you would want to show on two different alignments, you would have to have two different copies of this model. You could then go and edit the station and offset in the tag to be the station and offset of your boring relative to your new alignment. You would of course have to edit the station and offset in the header block as well. At that stage, you would not have to edit the station and the offset in the footer block, but I recommend you do it just to be consistent and to avoid any confusion. Let's go take a look at that. So this is my proposed boring plan. I have an interchange project. This is State Route 310 and I-70 in Licking County. And you can see I have borings on my main line and on my ramps. You don't have to, but I recommend that you separate the models for your boring graphics into separate DGN files by alignment. Put all of your borings for your main line in one file and put the borings for each of your ramps in a separate DGN file. That'll make it easier to use the Place Boring Graphics VBA. And then if you have cases like boring number 3 that I want to show on my main line and on ramp D both, then all I have to do is go over in the model and edit the location information in the model for that boring for on ramp D. I started out by running the Geotechnical Report VBA for each of my alignments. So when you do that, you're going to get boring location information for all of the borings in your GPK file, not just the ones that are on the alignment that you selected. So all you have to do is just delete out the ones you don't need. I know from my boring plan that I need borings 21, 22, and number 3. And we'll sort those. And save my file. For borings 21 and 22, this is the location information that I put into my GINT database. I did not use this location for boring number 3. I used the location information relative to the State Route 310 alignment. This location information. When we go to place the boring graphic on the profile for ramp D, we will have to edit the location information in the model. Let's go take a look at that now. So this is the cover sheet to my geotechnical exploration sheets. You can get the DGN files and PDFs of the sheets for this project from the Office of Geotechnical Engineering website. We use this as an example of how to combine a soil profile and a structural foundation exploration into one set of drawings. And then in my design model, again, the standard practice in the office is to place all of our boring graphics in the design model of our cover sheet. I did that, and then I moved them all into separate models in this DGN file. What I'm going to do next is copy all of these models into separate DGN files sorted by alignment, and then I'm going to come back in here and delete these out, because having multiple copies of something when you don't need it is a bad idea. This is my plan and profile sheet for ramp D. The whole alignment for ramp D fit on one sheet. And as you can see, I have my sheet properly placed in my sheet model. We'll go over and look in the design model. The standard practice in the Office of Geotechnical Engineering is to place the profile in the design model of the DGN file with the plan and profile sheet, or at least the first sheet if you have more than one. That's just a practice that we adopted. There's no standard to do that. We do that rather than have another base map file with the profile in it. After that, I also added the models for the boring graphics for the borings that fall on ramp D to this DGN file as well. I did that by using the Import Models tool on the Models palette. You launch that, select the cover sheet, tell it open, and then just select the models that you want to copy. Then you would just tell it OK. I'm going to hit cancel, because as you can see, I've already done that. Then we can just go over into the model for boring number 3 and edit the location information so that it references ramp D instead of the main line. I'm going to close this box and we'll edit the tag. That is the station and offset relative to State Route 310, and we want the station and offset relative to ramp D. So we'll just go back over in our spreadsheet, copy the station, overwrite that, put the plus sign back into it, and we'll go back, get the offset. Offset is to the right, means it's positive. Make sure we get the negative sign taken out. And tell it OK. You would also have to edit the station and offset information in the header block, and you would want to edit the footer block. I've already done that. I had these sheets built before I made the video, and I didn't go back and undo all of that just for demonstration purposes. So now you can go back over in the design model. Then you could run the Place Boring Graphics VBA and place those borings on this profile. I'm not going to go over that today. You can go and watch the other video on how to do that. Then you can go back into your sheet model, find my profile, set it to live nesting, set my levels on my borings, and there you have it. Fit my view, save my settings, and we're all done. So that's all I have for you for today. If you have any questions about the gINT fence reports or anything in gINT or the geotechnical VBAs in MicroStation and GeoPack, feel free to give me a call. Thank you.